There we go. All right. Who are we missing? All right, guys, we're going to get started again with part two. Hope you guys all had enough refreshments, coffee, tea, bathroom break. You all found the bathroom. Everyone saw the nice sign that said women only. Guys, there was like the shortest queues possible for the guys' toilet because there are only about 4 of us. Is what it is. All right, so thank you for sticking around. Next up we have Tracy and Elanza from Dogtown, Pretoria. What makes a successful NPO? Move it on. Or?
Hi everybody, I'm Tracy, that's Elanza. We were very humbled to be invited to come talk at today's conference. Most of the stuff we've learned for our own shelter was information we gathered at conferences just like this one. So we are very keen on people sharing their information to help us all do a better job for our dogs, animals. Sorry, I'm the dog person. So we are by no means experts, but what we are going to talk about today is taking you through our journey of some of the pitfalls we had when we were starting, and things that we are hoping that if anybody else is looking for ways to avoid these pitfalls, we're going to just tell you how we dealt with them. First of all, a little bit about Dogtown. We started off as Barking Mad, which was just supposed to be a network for people to share animals looking for homes, for us to fundraise to get food donated to shelters, and for it to be a central portal for all shelters to put their animals on looking for homes. Somehow that ended up becoming Dogtown, which was a full-blown animal rehabilitation center. So I'm pretty sure most of you didn't always plan to go this route. You just ended up here. That's what happened to us. And anyone that tells you that TV doesn't influence people, they lie, because it all started when I watched a program called Dogtown on National Geographic, and I went from being a TV editor to picking up dog poop for a living. So some of the things we've had within our shelter when we first started, these are some of the 6 of the most the pitfalls we experienced. Lack of research beforehand. It wasn't a planned movement. I went on holiday to Dogtown and came back and started picking up dog poop. A lot of times when we start these shelters, we don't have a plan in place, which becomes a real problem when you're a year or 2 in. A lack of understanding of shelter metrics, which we thought we knew, and we thought we were working with good shelter metrics. But recently we were invited to Battersea in the UK to do a workshop, and we learned we don't actually know enough about shelter metrics. My passion is always for the care of the animals. A lot of people think they just need to provide food, shelter, and water, whereas for me, I'm very much involved in the enrichment of the animals in our care. Somebody in a prison gets food, shelter, and water for a crime. To give our dogs those 3 things, and that's all, is a crime for us, because our dogs deserve better. They didn't do a crime. Humans failed them. Finding the right team is a real difficult one. We are only 10 years young, November. And we've had ups and downs trying to find the right people, because obviously we don't have pots of money to throw at good people. And it's not that good people don't deserve the money, we just can't afford it. And then the rehoming of dogs responsibly. Each year we learn something else to better our rehoming. So on one of the workshops I attended, somebody came up in the conference and said, okay, I want you to partner up with the person next to you, and in 30 seconds tell them everything they need to know about your shelter, which I thought, easy, I got this. Until I started talking, and it was like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and they said, when you meet somebody for the first time, you've got 30 seconds to grab their attention. If it's a potential donor, a supporter, you've got to be able to tell them in 30 seconds everything about your shelter that makes them want to invest in you and donate to your shelter. So it's a really good exercise to practice, even if you just write it down somewhere and have your little 30-second piece. So when you're next at an event, when somebody asks you who you are and what you do, you've got that little nugget, and they've got all the information they need to get within that very short time. So, before you start, unfortunately, most of us, we didn't plan anything to start the movements we're in. We just kind of ended up there. But the best thing to do is if you can do a little bit of research. So when I realized my life had taken that real abrupt turn, I thought, well, I got to know what I'm doing. My passion was animal behavior and training, so I was always doing that with my own dogs. And when I started volunteering at the shelters, I was seeing that there were a lot of dogs that were just misunderstood. They didn't have big problems, but people didn't want them because they were jumping, barking, chewing. And I thought, all those dogs need are a few minutes every day for you to work on that behavior and help change them, and then they would become more adoptable. But the more I met with people, the more I realized not everybody has a behavior background that's working in animal shelters, and they don't have the time and the resources to be able to work with those dogs. So when I traveled and went to Dogtown, I worked with them when they were in their rehabilitation area, and I realized that was my passion. So when I came back, I knew for Dogtown, South Africa to be born, that is what I wanted to focus on. I didn't know what to do. I came from TV, so I didn't know which route to go to start an animal shelter. So what I did is, on my conference that I'd gone there, they taught you everything about how to start and run an animal sanctuary. So I basically brought the blueprint back, and that's how we ran. Probably for the first 4 years, we didn't even change anything. We just did it that way because that's all I knew, and that's how we ran our facility. But it was a good way of us starting, because we weren't starting with no knowledge. We were starting working with an animal shelter that was 35 years old at the time, and they had already gone through the pitfalls, and we got to avoid some of them, but we still hit a few pitfalls ourselves. So then the next problem we hit was getting legal. A lot of shelters and rescue groups are not legal. And by legal, I mean being a registered NPC, NPO, PBO. So we didn't really know anything about that either. So we went to the accountants that were working with my previous business and asked them if they could set us up. They originally set us up with an NPC, and then once we were working as an NPC, people started asking us what our NPO number was. So then we went back to the accountants and said, okay, we need an NPO now. So then we got the NPO number, and then people started asking for tax certificates, and then I was told you need a PBO. So we went on a very expensive route to get all the things legal, but it does help you substantially for donations, and specifically if you can give somebody a tax certificate. If you've got an NPO, we found that the NPO had more respect because you can upload your NPO report every year and your financials, so people can check how you're doing, what you're doing with the money. And with that, they're more trusting in giving you their hard-earned money. Then the next one is, how are you going to fund your shelter? I'm pretty sure most of you it's just one dog. Can't you take it in? Or if I had a farm, I could just save animals. So, yeah, that farm is this much of your stress level and your fundraising. People forget just one dog here, just one dog there, very quickly becomes too many dogs. Even this year, at the beginning of the year, we were 175 dogs. We've always focused on 150 because that is our shelter metric. But somewhere along the line, we got a little bit lost. And then we quickly realized that our shelter metrics were there for a reason, because now we can't afford to pay everything because of those 25 dogs, which were all just one dog extra. So what we did there is we then froze our intake, got back down to our 150 dogs, and you get flack. I'm sure all of you get this when you can't help every dog, but you've got to be realistic. You can't have dogs that you can't provide adequate care for. Also, when you start, you need to know what you want to achieve with your shelter. I knew when I started I wanted to be a rehabilitation center for behavior for misunderstood dogs. The problem we've had now with that within our shelter is now people think that's all we have, and it isn't. We have lots. In fact, 2/3 of our shelter are beautiful adoptable dogs, but people believe because with the rehabilitation center we only have misunderstood dogs, which is not the case. So be very specific about what you want the public to see you as. How will you measure success? It's a very important thing to know and for you to focus on your shelter. For us, our measurement of success is if a dog comes in as a rehab dog, that he moves throughout the shelter to eventually be adopted. Our shelter's broken into 3 different categories. We have the rehabilitation center, we have dogs that we call Mutts in Motion, which is our work in progress dogs, and then we have our adorable adoptable dogs. So for us to measure our rate of success is if that dog comes into rehab, it moves to work in progress, adorable adoptables, and then is adopted. If our dogs are stagnant, then it's not really, we're not being successful. And there's a couple of dogs we struggle with to get past over their issues, but we've got to be realistic in whether they are safely rehomable or not, or if we have to continue working with them. Understanding the metrics is a real difficult one. That is, we work on that as how many dogs you can afford and how many dogs one person can take care of. So at Dogtown, we work on a 10-to-1 ratio. So for every one person, the maximum amount of dogs they're allowed to care for is 10. And the reason we got to 10 was because at Dogtown, every dog has to leave their garden at least once a day. They have to be on an enrichment program, a training program, or a behavior modification program. So one person cannot do, in fact, 10 is actually a little bit too much, but we're stuck at that number at the moment. But you've got to be realistic. You can't just keep dogs coming in and overburdening your staff with too many dogs to get through too much work within the day. And then get social. I think we are in the best time to try and fundraise socially. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, Tumblr. Get on all those networks. One of the big things we realized was people were more, they would donate more if you showed the journey of the dog. So don't just take the dog in, show, oh my goodness, this dog is in such a terrible state, and then people give you donations and then they never hear of it again. If you let them get attached to that dog, 5 minutes on Facebook to give them a little daily or weekly update on how the dog's doing because of their donations is going to help you to attract more donors and for people to see where their money's going. And I know for me personally, if a page has just sad stories all the time, I eventually stop following it because our jobs are hard enough as it is with our own dogs in our own care. We want to see that dogs are getting better, moving, finding a loving home. This is my favorite bit. So we're in a little bit of a fortunate situation. Early on, we got a food sponsor, but even before we had the food sponsor, we try and give our dogs a consistent diet. There's 2 reasons for it. The one is because if our doggy has, a dog in our shelter has an upset stomach, because we do poop reports daily, if they've got an upset stomach, we know it's not necessarily the diet, it's something else is going on. And also, a balanced diet also affects behavior, and if we're working with behavior cases a lot, we need to know that it's not the mixed food we just added that's now making the dog a little bit more stressed. Preventative care is something that we always forget about when we're talking about how much money we're going to need to care for dogs. Where we are, ticks are a huge problem. So not only is it very costly financially, but it's costly with time management because we have those 150 dogs that have to be dipped. We have some dogs that don't like water, and we have dogs that struggle being handled. So obviously those dogs are going to have to go on to the other products that they don't have to be handled so much, and those become very expensive. but it's pointless cutting out your preventative care, your deworming, your vaccinating, because if you skip that, your vet bills are going to be huge. The basic physical care, our rule at the center is to make sure that once a day the dog leaves the area. It can either be a short walk or just take them to the play area or to the office to visit somebody, just so they get out of their little areas and they don't end up having cabin fever. Our gardens for the dogs are already pretty big. They're 20 meters long, but it's because some of our dogs are there for a long time, so we can't have little tiny enclosures if they're going to take 6 months to a year to rehabilitate. Enrichment is a very important part of our shelter, mainly because people think just going for a walk is all that the dog needs. But when you're working with a lot of the big breeds that we're working with, getting them nice and fit and healthy becomes even worse. You don't want a 40-kilogram athlete on the walking trail. So we spend a lot of time working, enriching them mentally. And it's really easy to do things in mental enrichment with simple household products, or there are ready-made products now that you can use to help. And I don't know if any of you have ever studied, or even like Elanza and I preparing this, that mental is a lot more exhausting than walking around the block a couple of times. At Dogtown, we document and record our animal journey from the beginning. From when they come into the center, we do as much as we can by gathering as much information from the person handing the dog over to us. We also understand that not everybody is going to give you the honest opinion of what's going on with the dog, so sometimes we find things out the hard way. We do assessments so we can see, are they going to be good with dogs, cats, children, domestics. I think it's very important for you to know the animals in your care. To just take animals and rehome them and you don't really understand what your dog, in my case, our dogs in our case, what the triggers are that are going to set them off, it can become very irresponsible, and you don't want people thinking that your shelter gives out troubled dogs. Once they've had the assessment, the behaviorists and trainers put together an enrichment and training plan for every dog in the center, and then the caregivers each day go through those to make sure that everything is achieved. I know you'll know, like for us, there's some days where you have this brilliant plan of what's going to happen, and it goes like this, and this dog needs fetching, and this dog's been found in a ditch. But we do our best to keep at least hitting one or two of our targets for the day. And then the record keeping is important for our caregivers to make the notes for us, because then the behaviorists and trainers can have a look and see the dog's now not advancing anymore. What could that problem be? And we can relook at the behavior modification program or training plan, because with dogs, people need to understand that one solution doesn't fix all. We continuously give workshops that are centered for our staff and for the public to try and help people understand taking care of animals isn't just giving them water and taking them for a walk, food and water and taking them for a walk. So these are some of the enrichment tools we use. The top right-hand one, that's a really complicated one. Our girl dogs are really good at it. Just saying. The bottom one's a little bit more easier. The boy dogs are good at that. And then this is a really cheap way. We've just took empty buckets, ice cream buckets, and we've put their normal food they're going to get during the day. We've added a bit of gravy, and then in the middle we hide a little treat, and we freeze it. Especially in the summer, we have hectic heat on our mountain of our rescue center, so that one not only is a nice cooling thing for the dogs, it also keeps them mentally and physically stimulated, because it takes them quite a while to get through that. But there's always one dog that's going to prove you wrong and crunch it in 2 seconds, and then you're like, now what? Next. That's the end of my bit, thank God. All right, I'm going to hand you over to Elanza now.
Yeah, I drew the short straw. I get to talk about the people stuff. One of the pitfalls that Tracy mentioned is that you need to have a dream team, otherwise your NPO will struggle. So a very good place to start is to find people who share the same passion as you. When you're in the business of saving lives, you can't have people who are simply in it just for the job, but they need to share your passion and they need to help you to build your dream. Invest in reliable and qualified staff. It's all good and well having a really big team, but unless they are dedicated and equipped and qualified to do the job properly up to the standards that you've set for them, you might as well not have them. We've come to learn the hard way that it is better to invest in one good person than to have two non-qualified people on your staff. Another important thing is to find experts within their field. An example is if you need to have the electrical wiring done at your shelter, get an electrician to do it. Don't get the guy who donated a bag of food on the weekend who said you could have a look, don't let him do it. The same with your books and your accounting. Get someone who's qualified to do it right from the beginning. It'll save you a lot of hassles. Ongoing training of your staff is equally as important as having qualified staff. You need to always make sure they further their skill sets so that they can help the dogs better. At Dogtown, we provide weekly skills workshops for our staff. These workshops are quite extensive. They vary from basic dog handling right the way through to implementing behavior modification programs. We've also got an international trainer from the IMDT who comes to Dogtown once a year, and he presents classes to our staff and to the public. At the end of the day, the more equipped your team is to help the dogs in your care, the more dogs you can help in the long run. Then it all circles back to funding. Right from the beginning, make sure you've got a dedicated fundraiser. To successfully run your NPO, you can't be living from hand to mouth. You can't wait until your container is empty and then start looking for somebody to donate food. Get yourself a fundraiser whose dedicated job that is just to make sure that your basics is covered at all times. The last part of the team situation that I'd like to mention is volunteers. Now, at Dogtown, we have an incredible group of volunteers who help us. We are so grateful for them. But I do want to mention here that you as an NPO cannot rely on volunteers for the basic care of your dogs. You need to make sure that you have got a qualified and a solid permanent team to make sure that your dogs get the very best care to the standards that you've set for them without a volunteer anywhere in the picture. Anything that comes along with a volunteer is then just an added bonus. I think a big mistake that people make when they start their NPO is thinking that they'll get the dog stuff sorted and off the ground and that they'll worry about the human stuff later. Take it from us, do the human stuff right from the beginning as well. It is just as important. Make sure your staff have job descriptions. They need to know exactly what is expected of them, exactly what their job is, exactly what you want from them to give the dogs the best care. Employment contracts, just as important. Again, get a labor lawyer to help you or a consultant, but make sure these contracts are drafted from the beginning. Not only will they protect your employees, but they will also protect you. Then the Employee Handbook, that is basically your HR Bible. Anything to do with employees and your organization goes in that handbook. So it does take a bit of time to set up in the beginning, but it is so worth it. Put in the effort and have it done. Anything to do with people and your NPO goes in that handbook. So from your dress code, your disciplinary code, your leave procedures, your UIF, pay-as-you-earn deductions, anything to do with your HR goes in that Bible, and that you can always refer back to, and your employees can always refer back to that. So get that done. The same goes with your standard operating procedures. These are so important. Put in the time, make them work. Your SOPs are basically your set of processes, how you want things done, in not just your HR, but in every aspect of your NPO. If you've got these procedures in place, it'll save you a lot of hassles in pretty much every aspect of your NPO going forward. That wraps up human stuff. It brings me to my favorite part, which is the adoptions, which I think is really the end goal for all of us when we take dogs into our care. The end goal is to get them adopted into loving homes. We at Dogtown put in a lot of work into our adoption procedure and our adoption process because we want to make sure that when that dog leaves Dogtown and goes to their forever home, that it is exactly that, it is their forever home. So I'd like to just mention a few things that we find to be very important. Again, like Tracy mentioned, we are by no means the experts, but these are the things that we have found to really, really work for us. So our adoption process or our adoption procedure kicks off with a pre-interview. This is basically where we chat to the family, get a feel for them, find out why they're looking to adopt, or what their family dynamic is, what kind of dogs they have, what they're looking for. It's during this pre-interview where a lot of matchmaking happens from our side. We do find that people sometimes come and they want to adopt a dog based on what the dog looks like. That doesn't work. We consult with our caregivers very carefully, and we know exactly our dog's personalities, what they need. So once we figure out from the families as well what they need, we actually match them up with the correct dog, not with the dog that they like the look of. So once that happens, we officially kick the process off with an adoption application, which is quite comprehensive. We have had complaints, but it is what it is. We need to know all that information. So it contains, there's so many things there that we need to know. A very important part there to remember is reference checks and vet checks. That needs to be in there. So once your application's been approved, that's when we head out to do the home check. So the home check for us is really the most important part of the adoption process. The person who does the home check needs to know what they're doing. When you're doing home checks for animals, it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. A small, complex type garden might be declined for a young, active Jack Russell, but we would approve it for an oldie looking for a retirement home. So the home checker needs to know what they're looking for. We obviously check for things to see that it is safe and secure. We check to see, that where the dog will sleep, that there's shelter, all of those things. But another important thing to also look at is the condition of the existing dogs, and also to check the interaction of the family and the existing dogs. Then you'll get a better feel for whether the dog is going to be a guard dog or just going to be outside. At Dogtown, we do require our dogs to be an integral part of the family and sleep indoors at night. So when we go there, we want to see the family interact with their dogs, and we want to see the dogs actually going into the house and being comfortable on the couches. Right, so once the home check's been approved, we get the family to bring their dog out to Dogtown, and our trainers and our behaviorists do the introductions. They introduce them to each other and to make sure that the dogs get along. Sometimes it doesn't work, then we will have a backup dog match on our matchmaking system in the beginning, but most of the time it does work. But it is important that those introductions are done right from the beginning. Right, so now if all of that's been approved and your dog is ready to go home, it is very important for you as an NPO to have a checklist. Firstly, and very importantly, make sure that that dog is sterilized. At Dogtown, we sterilize the dogs as they come in, but it's still important to have that on your checklist. Make sure that they are sterilized. It's not negotiable. Again, microchips is very important. Make sure that is done. We recommend keeping the chip details in the name of your NPO. We have come to find that families change their numbers or their addresses a couple of years down the line, and the last thing they think of is updating the chip database. That dog then gets out somehow, gets picked up by a vet, the vet tracks down that number, and that number doesn't exist anymore, and that dog can't be reunited with their family. Which brings me to an important point. Which brings me to that important point is the record keeping. Make sure that you've got a very detailed database of all of your dogs. If a dog with your chip number, I did lose it, so I'm not imagining it. Right, where was I? Right, so the chip number, like I said, you need to have a detailed record keeping system. So if somebody, a vet, phones you and says the dog's been picked up with this chip number and that dog was adopted 5 years ago, You can't be rummaging through 5 years' worth of adoption files to try and find it in the archive somewhere. You need to be able to, at the drop of a hat, find that information and track down that dog's family so that you can have a strict word with them about why that dog was picked up. Right, so checklist. Sterilize, microchip, vaccinate and deworm, those things on all non-negotiables we send the vet book with. At Dogtown, we also send some of the food that the dog's been on with them just to help keep that consistent diet. And we also send them a little booklet, which we like to call their instruction manual. Anything to do with that dog that our caregivers have picked up goes in that booklet. So that is all of their likes, dislikes, quirks, what food they like, how they like it. Pretty much everything you need to know about that dog goes in the booklet, and that helps that family to understand their dog just a little bit better. And then very lastly, what I'd like to finish off with is once that dog goes home and that dog's been adopted, that is not where your responsibility ends. When that dog came into your shelter, you committed to that dog for their entire life. So it is so important to make sure that you do follow-ups. Check in with the families, email, WhatsApp, there are so many ways, but check in with them regularly. Post-home visits, so important. It's not uncommon for dogs when they go home to have some struggles at home to settle in, but not only newly adopted dogs, dogs have been in their homes for a couple of years, something might have happened, a new dog could have come in, the dynamic has changed, and suddenly the family are sitting with some problem or the dog's having some difficulty. If you're in touch with them regularly, they will bring this to your attention, and that is where you need to provide post-adoption support. Our trainers and behaviorists are always on standby to go out and assist the families to help them through these struggles and hopefully prevent a dog from being returned to a shelter. That is why we find that post-adoption support is so important to make sure that you help that dog through their entire life. All right, I think that finishes up everything to do with our adoptions. I think we've spoken quite a bit today, and I hope we've been able to give you and show you some insights into some of the pitfalls that we've had, and if we can help you with just one thing to help your NPO run a little bit smoother, then it's a win for us. Thank you very much for having us. Are there any questions for Tracy?
No. Yes. I can pretend I'm like Oprah. Okay, so the question was, how are we monitoring the record keeping for the animals' daily routine? Right. So I'm pretty sure a lot of us within the shelter environment are going to have staff with different education levels. Me? I didn't get the sign language. I thought he was saying she's so little. Okay. So speak quick. Okay. So we have different levels of education at the center. So in our, at the moment, we are all paper-based. But even being paper-based isn't completely foolproof because not everyone can write good English with all the staff. So we have created ourselves a little symbol system. So, you know, we can get a smiley face or a sad face, or so we can see that they had a good day or a bad day with that specific dog. We are looking at creating a software program purely because at the end of the week when our trainers have to go through the files, it's a lot of information to write down, especially if they're doing a behavior modification program and they're trying to document each step that they're doing. That becomes a lot when you've got 150 dogs. But then remember, probably only about 40 of the dogs have a full behavior modification program, and the guys that are working with those dogs generally have to have an international accredited diploma in animal behavior, so they're pretty clued up on writing their reports. But at the moment we're doing paper. We are trying to get it onto a computer system, but it's expensive. And it's hard to get everything that we need to have on that system. Elanza's very good with getting all the, if you need any information on the dog, it goes to her, and somehow it just, you can do a search and then it all comes back. So you need an Elanza, but not this one.
It's all on Excel at the moment, but we are looking, like Tracy said, getting a proper software. But at the moment it works for us. We can find pretty much anything you need to know about any dog still with us or adopted 10 years ago at the drop of a hat. So it's maybe not the most modern system, but it works, and we've got all the information.
Any data capture software developers, give me a call.
I do believe we have a software speaker tomorrow, so stay tuned. What's your question? Backs up to the cloud. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so Google Sheets, Google Drive, anything cloud-based is always a handy tool to have as well, because as you said, if something crashes, because we know replacing a computer is a cost that's not everyone can plan for, it's a good idea to have a cloud-based backup as well. There was another question. Tommy. Okay, so the question is, how are you handling your pit bulls?
The same way we're handling with all the other dogs that are coming in. We do have a large pit bull population at Dogtown. One, we don't call them pit bulls because automatically people then just have a preconceived idea what they are. We call them staffy mixes, which in theory that's what a pit bull is. So we're going with that and we're going to stick with it. But we do have a lot. Surprisingly, this year we're getting a lot more bull bulls. And a lot more bull bulls with issues. I'd take a pit bull with issues over an 80-kilogram bull bull any day. Going down our mountain, another word of advice is don't start your rescue center on a mountainside, especially if you're large breed dogs. Our pit bulls, staffy mixes, are a very small problem within the center, as in like taking care of them. They are like a dream to care for. The biggest problem is homing them. A lot of them have to be single living dogs or with people that have a good concept of a terrier in general, not just pit bull, any terrier, including Yorkshire. So our biggest issue is getting them homed. We have no issue getting them in. They just keep coming. But it is a problem, and it is a problem because there are a lot of rescue centers that are not even willing to take them in. There are a couple of pit bull breed-specific, but they're just so overwhelmed. The problem is they have become very popular within the wrong circles. I don't really know how to fix the problem. I think it's a worldwide problem. But as far as caring for them, they're our easiest dogs in our center. I mean, it's actually soul-destroying seeing them every single day, the most loving guys ever, and we can't get them a home. Or if there is a home that somebody that comes to adopt, it has to be a very strict home check. I know Elanza specifically with a pit bull, you're not allowed to see it from the street in the home. And that's not negotiable because they're up for being stolen on a regular basis. Okay.
One more. Okay, so just for the live stream, because the live stream can only pick up what's on the microphone. The question is, how do you attract volunteers if your shelter is further out of town than most normal things? All right.
It's a really good question, because we recently moved out of town. So you have to move out of town if you need a big piece of property for you to be able to care for the dogs adequately. You need a big piece of property, and everyone knows in the small, we used to be in Midrand. You can't move in Midrand anymore, so we had to move out towards Hennops, Hartebeesport. When you do get a good volunteer, because you can get lots of volunteers that just want to show up and maybe spend an hour and go, but it's the ones that are going to come once or twice a month at least. Those are the ones you need to hang on for dear life when they do come. Especially if you're working with the power breeds, they need to be pretty savvy on walking the dogs, understanding the dogs that they're working with dynamics. We used to have a program where if you wanted to volunteer at Dogtown, you had to take part in our workshops, and we would teach you how to walk the dog on loose lead, how to teach it basic manners, so they would become a complementary part of our team. But what happened is when we put that rule in place, then people stopped coming. They didn't want to come and say, I'm going to be here from here to here. I'm willing to do the workshop to learn. It was people just wanted to pop in for an hour, cuddle the dogs and go, which in the beginning we thought that's fine. Because what was happening is we would work all week on a behavior program. Come the weekend, volunteers would take it out, be dragged around the walking trail, and on Monday we're back to square one with the dog pulling on lead. But it's a downfall if you turn the ones that just want to turn up for a couple of hours, because what we happened is when those volunteers disappear, so do your donations and your adoptions go down. When you're dealing with a specific breed and type of dog, you need to find those communities that specifically, you'll find a lot of people that are sympathetic to the staffy mixes, and there's others that don't want to work with them. You need to try and find them, but I don't know how other guys are, but we work hard trying to get volunteers. I mean, we just recently, we won a My School competition, and part of the competition was a prize for them to make a video about you. And we made our video about our volunteers instead to try and show people how much we appreciate them. A lot of volunteers feel unappreciated, and it's not. Most of the time we're just so busy, we forget to thank them. But it is hard, and you just need to, when you're in conversation with people, if somebody happens to say, oh, I love my staffy, why don't you come volunteer with me? You've got to have your eyes and ears open all the time. Volunteers are really hard to keep on board. When I've done the workshops overseas, they have full-time staff that are unpaid volunteers. So they're unpaid volunteers, but they work from 8 to 5 every day. They're willing to stick to that rule. We've struggled to find anyone that can afford to do that here. Does that answer your question?
Right, thank you both very much. You guys have come a very long way. Little something. Stay extra sparkly. As an owner of a power breed myself, I have a bull terrier. She's a tank with 4 legs. And yes, power breeds are not for the faint of heart. It takes a special owner to own a power breed, even though she thinks she's the size of a Yorkshire Terrier. Thank you guys for coming out for the first day of the conference. We've got a lot of exciting chats tomorrow, so I look forward to you guys will be there, so please be safe. Remember to, when you come in tomorrow, remember to check in with the event, check in with LiveMaxZA on Facebook, or at LiveMaxZA. Share it, get it out there, share it with your volunteers that couldn't be here, get them watching, they're welcome. It's live streaming, they can watch it live. They can be here without being here. So thank you very much for coming out. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and I'm assuming a couple more faces. All right. And let's try, we'll hopefully get the sound sorted out tomorrow so that we can actually get a mic out to you guys for your questions. Try and keep the questions straightforward, straight to the point, so we can